20 kid stars who are no longer in Hollywood. Their faces were the ones we loved seeing on TV and in movies. Magazine covers had their smiles on them, and billboards all over the country had their names on them. But all of a sudden they were gone. 30 kid stars who were famous when they were younger. Famous people from the golden age of Hollywood. What did these talented young people do after the cameras stopped rolling? Some of their stories will make you cry, and others may make you believe in people again. Going to start with some of the most famous kid performers from the 1930s to the 1970s. These stories are very interesting. Mr. Bobby Driscoll. Little Bobby Driscoll wasn't like other kids who act. He was the first kid star Disney hired, and he did the voice of Peter Pan and the face of Treasure Island. Bobby won the Academy Juvenile Award for his roles in The Window and So Dear to My Heart when he was only 12 years old. His future seemed endless, but he had a hard time with puberty. His chubby face, which used to be his best feature, started to change. His skin got scars from acne, and his face grew up. Walt Disney fired Bobby out of the blue in 1953, just 3 years after he was in the studio's live-action hit Treasure Island. He had treated him like a son before. According to people who work in the industry, Disney execs said Bobby was hard to work with, but the truth was much worse. He just didn't fit the picture they were going for anymore. When Bobby was 16, Disney dropped him and told him he was washed up. He then fell into a terrible cycle of drug abuse and small crimes. His parents didn't know how to deal with his growing problems, so they sent him to a rehab center. It didn't help much though. By the time he was in his early 20s, he was hooked on heroin, had been arrested several times, and had lost touch with the business that used to praise him. Bobby's life ends in a way that sounds like a Greek tragedy. In 1968, children in New York City found the body of a man while playing in an empty apartment building. He was placed in a pauper's grave on Hart Island, without a marker because no one knew who he was. After almost 2 years, his mother, who had not heard from her son in a long time, asked the NYPD to look into his absence again. Fingerprint records proved the terrible truth. Bobby Driscoll's body was found, never claimed. He was 31 years old and had died of heart failure from using drugs for a long time. The boy who used to fly as Peter Pan died alone, unknown and unknown. It may have been the cruelest turn in a life that started out so hopeful. 2. Margaret O'Brien. Margaret O'Brien's story ends on a happier note than Bobby's. As a child, she wowed viewers with her emotional range in movies like Meet Me in St. Louis, which starred Judy Garland. She won a special Academy Juvenile Award for her role as Tootie Smith, and MGM saw her as one of their best kid assets, because she could cry on cue. But by the early 1950s, Margaret's work had slowed down a lot. The change from being a cute kid to a teenager was hard, and jobs became limited. Margaret chose to leave the spotlight of Hollywood, rather than chasing chances that were becoming fewer and fewer. What happened next doesn't fit the usual story of a kid star. Margaret turned her attention back to school and her personal life. She got married and focused on her family. She made a few TV and stage appearances here and there, but she never tried to get back to her old glory. Marge O'Brien is now 87 years old and lives a quiet life in California. She was good with money compared to many of her peers, and she is still one of the few live links to Hollywood's golden age. She sometimes shows up at film festivals and events for old movies, where fans are thrilled to see that she still has the same kind personality and warm smile that made her famous more than 80 years ago. Margaret chose to leave Hollywood on her own terms instead of being kicked out because of changing tastes or falling fame. This is a path that child stars don't often take, one of graceful exit instead of painful expulsion. 3. When The Yearling first came out in 1946, both reviewers and audiences were blown away by Claude Jarman Jr. His natural performance as Jody Baxter. He was only 12 years old at the time. He won the Academy Juvenile Award for playing a boy and his pet deer in rural Florida in a way that seemed true to life. This seemed like the start of a long and successful career in movies. But by the early 1950s, Claude's name was no longer on movie theater marquees, and his face was no longer shown on TV screens. What became of this brilliant young actor who used to work with Gregory Peck and Jane Wyman? Unlike many kid stars who were forced to leave the business, Claude chose to leave Hollywood on his own. As a teen, he realized that school might be more stable than the unstable movie business. After being in interesting movies like Intruder in the Dust that didn't do very well at the box office, Claude decided to finish high school with his friends in Tennessee instead of on studio lots. Claude went to Vanderbilt University. After high school, instead of looking for comeback parts, after being in the Navy, he finally settled down in San Francisco. He worked for 15 years as the executive head of the San Francisco International Film Festival, a job that was very different from Hollywood. Claude Jarman Jr. is now 89 years old and lives a happy life with his family. He sometimes talks to the press about his short but important addition to film history. His decision to put school and a normal life ahead of fame is very different from those of his peers, who clung desperately to their acting jobs well past their prime, often at terrible cost. 4. At the end of the 1930s, and beginning of the 1940s, Deanna Durbin was one of the most famous child stars in the world. Her soprano singing and good looks made her one of Universal Studios' most profitable stars, and the studio is said to have been saved from going bankrupt because of her. Spurcherich had sued fan club for her with more members than any other star at the time, because she was so famous. After Bette Davis, Deanna was the second best paid woman in America by age 21. She made $400,000 per film. But when Deanna was at the top of her game, she made a shocking announcement that shocked Hollywood and broke the hearts of millions of fans. She was only 27 years old when she quit acting in movies for good. Deanna turned down a $200,000 deal, while other stars quit because their fans' tastes changed or they got old, quitting a job that other people would have killed for on their own. For the Love of Mary was Deanna Durbin's 21st movie. After finishing it in 1949, she disappeared from public life. She moved to a small town outside of Paris, France, and married her third husband, producer Charles David. For the next 64 years of her life, she turned down almost all requests for interviews and all offers to perform again. She shut down so completely that many young Americans have never even heard of her, even though she used to be one of the most famous people in the world. When asked about her choice many years later, Deanna said something very unusual in Hollywood, and was never happy there. The life I was supposed to live was all made up and I couldn't handle it. She said that the fake image of being the perpetual girl next door was making her feel suffocated, and no amount of money could make up for the loss of her private and true self. Deanna lived a quiet life in France until she died. In 2013, at the age of 91, she stubbornly refused all efforts to bring her back into the public eye. Her choice to leave her fame and money behind may still be the most dramatic self-imposed vanishing in Hollywood history. 5. With his blonde hair and expressive blue eyes, Brandon DeWild won hearts in Shane 1953, where he said the famous line "Shane, come back," that is still important in the history of movies. At age 11, he was one of the youngest people ever to be nominated for an Academy Award for his act. Brandon was able to easily switch from child actors to adult players in movies like HUD, while many other child actors have trouble doing so. Along with Paul Newman, and in TV shows like The Virginian, his skills made it look like he would have a long and successful career as an adult actress. But fate had something else in mind for Brandon. He lost control of his car near Denver, Colorado, in July 1972 and crashed into a work truck. Brandon DeWild's life was sadly cut short when he was only 30 years old. The boy who had asked Shane to come back would never be on TV again. After he died at such a young age, friends thought about what could have been. Some critics think Brandon had the skills and range to become one of the best character players of his time. Instead, his filmography has stayed at just 17 movies, which is a small but important impact. The story of Brandon makes us think about how fragile life is, and how quickly good jobs can go away. Even though he didn't want to leave Hollywood so soon, his untimely death took him out of the stars just as he was beginning what should have been his best years as an actor. 6. Shirley Temple. When people talk about child stars, they have to start with Shirley Temple, who is the most popular child actor in movie history. During the Great Depression, her smile and bouncing hair were the only things that made people feel better. By the time she was 7, she was making $50,000 per movie, which is about $1 million today. Her dolls and dress lines also brought in millions more, but even Shirley Temple, who was the biggest star among child actors, had to deal with the harsh truth of Hollywood. Kids grow up. As she got older, she lost a lot of her attraction at the box office. When she turned 12, 20th Century Fox, the company that had made a lot of money off of her fame as a child, ended her contract. Shirley had a few failed attempts at teenage parts, including a screen test for The Wizard of Oz that didn't work out. At the surprisingly young age of 22, she quit acting in movies. Shirley Temple Black, as she became known after getting married, had one of the most successful second acts in American public life. This is in contrast to many former child stars who faded into obscurity or suffered with the loss of fame. After taking care of her kids, she got involved in politics. She ran for Congress, but lost and was later named a UN representative in 1969. She became the U.S. ambassador to Ghana, and then to Czechoslovakia, which showed that she was good at a lot more than just tap dancing and dimpled smiles. Shirley kept up a polite public image her whole life, rarely showing anger about how quickly she fell from fame in Hollywood. She once said, "I have one piece of advice for people who want to become actors," when asked about her amazing journey from child star to diplomat. Do not. After leaving Hollywood, she worked in public service, until her death in 2014. This showed that leaving the attention didn't mean giving up making a difference in the world, a good lesson for the little stars who came after her in tap shoes. 7. Tom Reddick was just Jeff Miller to a lot of Americans who grew up in the 1950s. He was the first boy who owned the famous collie in the TV show Lassie. Tommy became famous as one of the most recognizable child stars of his time, thanks to his all-American good looks and easy friendship with the dog star. However, Tommy's connection to fame was not simple. By the time he was 14, he was getting more and more uncomfortable with being famous, and how it affected his normal growth. He asked to be released from his Lassie contract, which shocked the producers. He turned down what many saw as a dream part. Life after Lassie turned out to be hard. Agents had a hard time seeing Tommy as anything but the boy with the famous dog, which happens to a lot of child actors. Tommy's parts became harder to come by, and by the time he was in his late teens, he was mostly gone from TV and movies. His adult years were full of ups and downs. In the 1960s, he was arrested for growing marijuana, which made it even harder for him to get back into acting. Tommy was having a hard time finding his place, so he went from working as a farmhand to a computer coder. In a strange way, Tommy finally found happiness after becoming famous in this last job. He became an early master in database programming, and went on to become a well-known software consultant and book author. Tommy died at age 54 in 1996, after a life full of dramatic changes. His career was about as far from Hollywood as you can think. Baby Peggy, Diana Sarah, and 8. It was a long time before Shirley Temple's curls bounced across TV screens, one of the first kid stars in silent movies. This little actress made over 150 short films, and a few features between 1921 and 1924, making her a worldwide star before she turned 6 years old. With her signature page boy haircut and serious face, she made fun of adult stars like Rudolph Valentino and Pola Negri, which made people laugh. Little Peggy made an amazing $1.5 million a year when she was at the top of her game, supported her whole extended family with what would be about $23 million today, and got over 1.7 million fan letters, which is amazing for any star, let alone a kindergartner. However, Baby Peggy's fame came with a terrible cost. Her father, a former cowboy with ties to Hollywood, was very strict about her job, and made her work up to 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. She didn't go to school, didn't have any friends her own age, and never got to see a dime of the money she made. People on the set would hold an ice cube to her face, until she stopped crying because she was so tired. By 1925, her career had ended because her father had fights with directors, and didn't handle her money well. The family's wealth was gone almost overnight, because they made bad decisions and spent too much. Peggy was clean by the time she was 7 years old, a passee before most kids even start first grade. The family was in dire need of money, so she had to go back to working in vaudeville. She did a lot of shows until the Great Depression stopped that source of income too. By the time she was a teenager, being known as Baby Peggy was too much for her, so she officially changed her name to Diana Sarah Carey, to get away from the way she was treated as a child. Diana lived a relatively normal life for many years, working normal jobs and trying to figure out what happened to her extraordinary youth.
Film historians didn't realize how important she was to the history of movies again, until she was in her 70s, and she started speaking out about child abuse in early Hollywood. She was the last big star of the silent era to live to be 101 years old, which is very old. She died in 2020. Diana turned her painful experiences into a force for good change as she got older. She wrote books and fought for the rights of child actors. The girl who became famous as Baby Peggy found her most important role as Diana Sarah Carey, a historian, author, and voice for people who have been abused by the entertainment business. 9. Scotty Beckett. Scotty Beckett was one of the original little bad guys in the Our Gang comedies. He was known for his sideways newsboy cap and sly grin. Later he made the jump to movies, and did well, playing younger versions of stars like Spencer Tracy and Frederick March. In fact, he played a young Al Jolson in The Jolson Story. The beginning of Scotty's job looked good. In the 1930s and 1940s, he worked non-stop, which kept him from losing his job all of a sudden, which happened to a lot of kid actors. He even got a recurring role on the famous TV show Rocky Jones, Space Ranger, when he was a teenager. This makes me think he might be one of the few child actors who can successfully move on to adult roles. Scotty seemed happy on screen, but he was really dealing with a lot of problems in his personal life. When Scotty's father died when he was 14, he went through a terrible mental roller coaster that he never fully recovered from. In his late teens, he started a pattern of self-destructive behavior that included drinking a lot, taking prescription drugs, and getting into more and more strange public incidents. In the 1950s, his downhill spiral got worse. Several marriages ended in divorce. He was arrested for drunk driving and check fraud, and his career, which had once looked bright, fell apart. By the late 1950s, Scotty couldn't get a job in Hollywood because his image had been ruined by his bad behavior and legal problems. The last part of Scotty's life reads like a Hollywood horror movie. When he went to a nursing home in May 1968, it was after a major beating that no one knows what happened. After 2 days, his body was found in his room. He was 38 years old, and had allegedly taken too many barbiturates. The official cause of death was described as likely self-inflicted death, but there are still questions about what happened. The difference between the happy boy in the cap who delighted audiences during the Great Depression, and the troubled man who died alone and was almost forgotten, shows one of the worst things that could happen when you become famous early on. While Scotty Beckett's life started out full of laughter and opportunities, it ended in tragedy before he turned 40. This is a sobering warning of the risks that come with fame. 10. Freddie Bartholomew. In the 1930s, no other child star was as refined and powerful as Freddie Bartholomew. With his perfect manners, British accent, and wide range of emotions, he became MGM's Shirley Temple. He starred in versions of books like David Copperfield, Little Lord Fauntleroy, and Captains Courageous. Freddie could get $2,500 a week at his peak, which was a huge amount of money during the Great Depression. Hollywood saw him as the perfect English schoolboy because of how well he behaved and how well he played the part, even though his real life was anything but perfect. There was a painful family story going on behind Freddie's success. He was born in London to poor parents, and was sent to live with an aunt. His aunt saw his promise, and brought him to America. When his acting career took off, his real parents showed up out of the blue, starting a nasty and well-known custody fight that was mostly about getting to his money. A lot of Freddie's money was spent on court fees from these family fights. By the time he was a teenager, his changed looks and the tastes of audiences made him less marketable. When the boy's contract ended at age 14, MGM did not want to keep him. He had been their prized possession. Freddie handled the end of his career with a lot more grace than many other kid stars. He changed everything about himself by going into TV ads. After being in the Air Force during World War II, he started out as a sales rep, and worked his way up to become an executive, and an award-winning director of TV ads in New York. As an adult, Freddie rarely talked about his acting days in movies. He wanted to be judged on his work in ads instead of his roles as a child. When he died at age 67, in 1992, many of his advertising co-workers were shocked to learn that the well-liked executive had once been one of Hollywood's most popular kids. His successful second job and classy way of dealing with his fall from fame set an example of how to be gracious under pressure that not many former child stars have been able to follow. Is Jackie Coogan. There is no doubt that Jackie Coogan was Hollywood's first big child star. When Charlie Chaplin saw the 7-year-old act in vaudeville, he hired him to be his co-star in The Kid 1921. Jackie's natural ability to make people feel things made him famous overnight. His moving performance as the abandoned child that Chaplin's character Tramp took in showed an emotional range that is rarely seen in artists of any age. Jackie's fame grew very quickly, and to amazing heights. His picture was on toys, clothes, and food, all over the world. Boys all over America copied his bob haircut. By the time he was 10, he had made about $4 million, which is about $60 million today, a wealth that came from his supernatural acting skills alone. But Jackie would never be able to enjoy the money he made. When he turned 21 and was ready to get his money, he found out a terrible truth. They spent almost all of his money on diamond rings, fancy cars, and fancy homes for themselves and his mother and stepfather. Only $126,000 was left of the millions he had made. After that, Jackie's court case against his own mother made headlines all over the country. Even though he only got a small part of his earnings in the end, his public fight directly led to the California Child Actors Bill, also known as the Coogan Law, being passed in 1939. This law requires that a portion of child actors' earnings be put into protected trusts. Jackie kept acting as an adult, but he never became as famous as he was as a kid. Later generations mostly knew him as Uncle Fester from the 1960s TV show The Addams Family, a part that was very different from the sensitive child who had once moved people to tears with Chaplin. Jackie's legacy is less about his work as an adult and more about the laws that were made because of his personal tragedy to protect child entertainers in the future. Every young actor who gets financial protections owes something to the boy whose abuse led to change. 12. It's Beverly Washburn. Beverly Washburn was one of the most sought-after child actors of the 1950s. Her expressive eyes and genuine sincerity made her stand out. Even though she never became as well known as some of her peers, people who watched TV often knew her from shows like The Lone Ranger, Dragnet, and Leave It to Beaver. People who watched movies often knew her from Shane and Old Yeller. Beverly's versatility kept her working steadily from childhood into her teens, which was a big deal at a time when many young artists had trouble moving beyond their childish appeal. Directors liked how she could cry effectively on cue, so they often put her in roles that needed her to be emotionally open. In contrast to the tragic lives of many former child stars, had a relatively smooth shift from child star to adult. As she got older, she had trouble getting big lead parts, but she kept working in TV and movies well into the 1970s, switching over time to smaller roles and guest appearances. Beverly gracefully left Hollywood when her acting opportunities dried up, focusing on her family life and the odd fan convention, where her roles in beloved movies like Old Yeller are still praised by movie fans. Washburn, who is now 81 years old, lives a quiet life in Las Vegas. She sometimes goes to film events and writes about her time in Hollywood's golden age. Her autobiography Real Tears gives an inside look at child acting in the 1950s without the sappy or angry tone that usually comes with these kinds of stories. Beverly is in the middle of the road for former child artists. She is neither a tragic victim nor an amazing success story. 13. Her work shows 17. June Lockhart. June Lockhart's career path is a big departure from the typical child actor's story, even though many people might not quickly think of her as a child star who went missing. June started her film career in 1938 in A Christmas Carol with her parents, who were both well-known actors. She made the dangerous shift from child actress to adult actress without any problems, while many of her peers failed. During her teenage years, June was in movies like the memorable Meet Me in St. Louis, but it was when she was an adult and playing moms on famous TV shows like Lost in Space and Lassie that she became famous. She went from being a kid actress to a beloved TV mom, which is very rare in Hollywood. She has been successful throughout many stages of her life. June Lockhart, who is 99 years old, is one of the last live links to Hollywood's golden age. She still makes public appearances and tells stories from her amazing 9-decade career in show business. The fact that she was able to dodge the problems that many young performers did is a positive contrast to the sad stories that usually come up when people talk about former child stars. 14. Gloria Jean. Because of her beautiful high voice and good looks, Gloria Jean was once considered a possible replacement for Deanna Durbin, who was a huge hit at Universal Studios. Gloria's first movie role was in The Underpup, 1939. After that, she was in a number of musicals that were meant to show off her great singing voice. Several of these movies starred comedy star Donald O'Connor. Even though Gloria was in more than 20 movies before she turned 21, her career started to fade in the late 1940s, when people stopped wanting to watch the innocent musical comedies she had been known for. Universal didn't renew her contract, and the parts she got at smaller studios didn't help her career move forward again. Gloria didn't desperately hold on to her fading fame like many other artists did. Instead, she looked at her options with clear eyes and chose stability over the risk of chasing diminishing returns in Hollywood. By the early 1950s, she had quit all forms of theater and was working as a hostess for Redken Laboratories. Later, she was working as an executive receptionist. Gloria was happy in the years after she became famous. She raised her son and kept in touch with a few Hollywood friends on a personal level while building a life that had nothing to do with her fame. When asked about her decision to leave show business years later, she didn't feel bad about it. She said, "When it was time to move on, I moved on." Her death in 2018 at age 92 didn't get much news from the media, which shows how far away she had become from public life. Gloria Jean's classy exit from fame shows that a short time in the spotlight doesn't have to define a person's whole life. 15. Kevin Corcoran. Disney fans from the 1950s and 1960s knew Kevin Corcoran right away as Moochie, the perfect American boy who appeared in many Disney shows and movies, such as the Spin and Marty serials, on the Mickey Mouse Club, and movies like Old Yeller, The Shaggy Dog, and Swiss Family Robinson. Kevin's freckled face and happy, naughty personality made him the perfect post-war American boy. Walt Disney was personally interested in his success and consistently cast him in roles that helped make him known as the perfect kid brother. Kevin knew from a young age that he might be better off behind the camera than in front of it, which is different from many child stars who have trouble making the change. She wrote that after studying theater arts at California State University, he did well as an assistant director and producer on shows like Quantum Leap, Baywatch, and Murder. Kevin's job behind the scenes lasted longer and was more consistently successful than his acting career, which doesn't happen very often for people who used to be child actors. He was very good at directing kid actors later in his career, because he knew how things worked on set, because he had been one himself as a young actor. Kevin died of colorectal cancer in 2015, when he was 66 years old. He had an impressive record of professionalism in 2 separate Hollywood jobs. First as a dependable kid star for Disney, then as a well-known producer and director for TV shows. His ability to switch from one side of the camera to the other shows a level of adaptability that many former kid actors lack. 16. Jon Provost. Jon Provost played Timmy Martin on Lassie from 1957 to 1959. It was one of the most famous child parts in the history of TV theater. His experiences with the famous collie captivated people all over the world for 7 years, making his face one of the most recognizable in the United States. When the show was at its peak, Jon got more than 2,000 love letters every week. His blonde hair and innocent looks became associated with the good family fun that was popular on TV in the 1950s. In contrast to Tommy Reddick, who played a Lassie before Jon, Jon left the show without a fight. Jon and his parents decided not to renew his contract when he turned 14. They thought he had grown up enough to stop playing the part of Timmy, who is always young. Timmy's family was written off the show when they moved to Australia, bringing Lassie with them. However, the collie would easily find her way back to America so that the show could continue with new human co-stars. After leaving Lassie, Jon had to deal with the usual problems that kid stars have. After that, he had a few parts in movies and TV shows, but nothing as big as his earlier fame. Jon finally decided to leave Hollywood for good instead of keeping looking for acting jobs that weren't paying well. After college, Jon had a successful career in Northern California developing real estate. This was about as far away from the theater business as you could get in California. He got married, had kids, and built a life that was very different from the days when he played the most famous dog on TV.